Major General Gregory A. Beast Feest was born in Racine, Wisconsin in 1956. He earned his commission in 1978 via the University of Wisconsin, Madison ROTC program. Feest began his military career as a navigator at Mather Air Force Base, California, and became a weapons systems officer in the F-111 Aardvark. In 1984, he completed undergraduate pilot training at Reese Air Force Base, Texas, and from 1984 to 1987, Feest served as an F-15C instructor pilot, flight examiner, and flight commander for the 27th Tactical Fighter Squadron, Langley Air Force Base, Virginia. In 1988, he transitioned to the F-117A Nighthawk and served in the 37th Tactical Fighter Wing at Tonopah Test Range, Nevada. During this assignment, Feest had the unique distinction of dropping the first bombs in two operations, Panama's Operation Just Cause and Operation Desert Storm. As a major, Feest led the first air tasking order which initiated the first wave of air attacks in Operation Desert Storm. His target was the Radar Intercept Operations Center in Iraq that linked border radars with the Air Defense Headquarters located in Baghdad. While Desert Storm was not the first operational use of the Nighthawk, this mission was distinctly different from Just Cause. Panama had virtually no air defense, but Iraq was considered to be one of the most heavily defended countries in history. On 17 January 1991, at 0251, Feest released a single GBU-27 toward his target. The 2,000-pound laser-guided bomb penetrated deep into the Intercept Operations Center. Close on the heels of this attack, coalition air forces began pounding countless Iraqi targets. Through the remainder of the campaign, the Nighthawk continued attacking the most difficult targets that required the highest degree of precision. Feest completed 39 combat missions against multiple critical targets throughout the war. Surprisingly, despite flying some of the most dangerous missions of the war, the Nighthawk did not record a single incident of battle damage. Feest later commanded at the squadron, group, and wing and numbered Air Force level and served as a command pilot with over 5,600 hours in numerous aircraft. He last served as the Air Force Chief of Safety and retired as a Major General in 2012 after 34 years in the U.S. Air Force.
Ladies and gentlemen, Major General Beast Feest.
So I became a pilot and I had a lot of fun. So that's what the rest of the video was going to show. Before I start, listening to General Horner is always enlightening, and I always learn something new. I want to comment on one thing he said. When he talked about his Franken flight suit, and he had one flight suit, and it was torn, and he had to sew it up. And things did get better. In 1988, when I was at Tonopah, I had 4 flight suits at Tonopah, 4 at Nellis, and on Friday nights at the club, if we got too much beer spilt on them, we just gave it back and said, give me a new one. So things do get better, and they will get better for you all. Okay?
Hi, General Feest. Again, thank you for being out here. Our time today is limited this morning, so I just want to get straight to the point and straight to the reason that everyone is here today, and is to listen to your war story. So can you detail your experiences on that, from takeoff to landing on that infamous 17 January 1991 night? So there you were.
Okay, so it's a 7-hour story, but I'll shorten it. So Desert Shield was great for us because we got to practice. And we got to practice everything we were going to do on the first night up to crossing into Iraq. So we would, once a week or once every 10 days, we would fly missions the same way we would if we were going to actually fly into Iraq. We would do everything, communications out. We would take off as 2 ships, never talking to radios, join on a tanker without using communication. Once we got on a tanker, we could talk on interphone to the boom operators and get updates from the pilots on the tankers. They would lead us up to the northern part of Saudi Arabia, and we would fly along the border, stay on their wing, and then fly back home. So that we were desensitizing the Iraqis into us flying along the border. So they would see tankers up there, they would see fighters up there, so that when Desert Storm kicked off, we did the exact same thing. However, then we stealthed up and departed the tankers and flew into Iraq for our missions. So having practiced that several times during Desert Shield was very helpful to all of us. The way we stealthed up the aircraft back then was we threw a couple switches. There were no beacons on the airplane. Everything was flat so that our radar cross-section was low. We throw a switch and the antennas would come in so we could no longer hear anybody or talk to anybody. So from then on, we were communications out. We would drop off the tanker and then fly into our target areas. So the first night, I was the first aircraft to go into, I wasn't the first aircraft to go into Iraq, let me say that. Task Force Normandy had gone in before myself, and the Apaches had taken out some radar vans right over the Iraqi border. So they actually shot the first shots of Desert Storm. What I did was drop the first bomb. So I dropped the first bomb 9 minutes before H hour, which was 0200, and I flew in and hit an intercept operations center. So the missions of the F-117, the first 12 aircraft, well actually both waves, but the first wave was 12 aircraft, was to take out their IADs, their integrated air defenses, so that the non-stealthy aircraft could come in behind us and not be intercepted or shot at till end game. So my target was, first one was an intercept operation center, and it was in an underground bunker. So I went into Iraq. Everything was great. Nobody knew I was there as far as I could tell. I realized we had to trust the engineers that built the F-117 and told us that our radar cross-section was low and that it would work. So I went into the first target area and everything was going great. I concentrated on finding the target. It wasn't very easy, but because of our techniques of looking at offsets, I was able to find the bunker. I watched the bomb guide into the bunker and then saw the doors and the vents blow out, so I knew I had hit it. So I was feeling pretty good about myself. I had to do a 180-degree turn to go to my next target, which was H2H3, which was out on the western side of Iraq. And that was the sites where they had the Scuds that we were worried they were going to shoot Scuds into Israel. So my next target was out there. As I did that 180-degree turn, I figured, well, I had a wingman 1 minute behind me. I'm going to look back and watch his bomb hit, since I had nothing else to do at the time. So I looked back, and I saw red lines coming up at me. And I thought, what did I hit? It's like something's exploding down there. It's causing these fireworks kind of stuff. And then I realized it was AAA. So it was the first time I'd ever seen AAA. General Horner talked about red flags. Red flags are great. Red flags, you go there and they say, okay, jink for AAA, and you'd get, you'd react because somebody told you there was AAA, but you never actually saw anything. The SAMs, they called them smoky SAMs, little, things you have on the 4th of July that go up in the air and smoke comes out of them, and yeah, okay, that's a SAM, but I'm not worried about it. I'm at red flag. Well, this was real, and I realized they were shooting at me, so I no longer cared about my wingman's bomb. I just pushed the throttles of the 117 up as far as they would go into mill power so that I could go 0.9 Mach, which was not very fast. But I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. And I did. So now, because the first bomb had hit, the Iraqis were all awake, and the skies were lighting up all over Iraq. And I looked out my right side, and I could see Baghdad, and the sky was lit up. And it's the videos you've seen, on CNN back then. And it's what we always said looked like, the Disneyland fireworks going off. I could actually see SAMs being launched, but none of them were steady on my canopy. And as long as there's line of sight, it's not aimed at you. It's when it's coming at you and it's not moving, there's no line of sight when you have to get worried. So nothing that I could see was being shot at me. And I thought, well, I'm glad I'm not going there. I'm just going out here to the west where they won't know that I'm there. But I looked in front of me, and it was 100-something miles in front of me, and it, again, looked like the same as Baghdad, only a smaller area, because Baghdad's a big city. And the problem was that smaller area, my target was right in the center of that, so it wasn't like I could not go there. And my target there was a sector operations center, not in an underground bunker, but in a big building, and so that was my target. Well, I guess we'll talk later, but the 117 software at the time, we had the GBU-27 bunker buster bombs that only we carried, 2,000-pound bombs, very accurate. They rarely, if ever, failed, and where we aimed them, they went. The problem was the software was such that we had to be below 10,000 feet to deliver that weapon. And being below 10,000 feet puts you in the heart of the AAA. So even after the first week, when General Horder decreed the only ones going to downtown Baghdad would be F-117s, we weren't too happy about that because we had to be below 10,000 feet flying through that heart of the AAA. In any case, I went out to the west. Again, I hit that target and made it through, and I was shocked. After delivering that bomb, I turned south and headed back to the Saudi border. And I had a knee board with all 12 call signs of the 12 aircraft in the first wave on my knee. The plan was once I got to a certain point, I would put my antennas back out and check in with my wingman, who again I said was 1 minute behind me on this whole route. I was thinking to myself, I made it through there, I hope he did, but I wasn't sure. And I checked in with him, and he answered, and we rejoined, and then we went on to the tanker to get gas so we could make it back to our base in Saudi Arabia. So I was happy that we were both survived. We made it through. And now I'm wondering about the other 10 aircraft. And slowly I listened to them check in with the tanker, and I checked off each time I heard a call sign, and in about 30 minutes I had checks next to every name. So that was a good thing. I knew we all made it out. And now the concern was, well, who got hit? Who had damage? And we it took another 2 hours to get home. The base we were at was 1,000 miles from Baghdad. So these were long sorties. When we got home, there were a lot of aircraft that had diverted into our base that had damage, F-111s, EF-111s, others. But the 12 of us, we had nothing wrong with any of our aircraft and nobody had got hit. So we were starting to believe in stealth technology.
Yeah. Well, as that strike package commander for the F-117s, how did you manage those 11 other aircraft, including yourself, in the event of a reattack or anything like that within the thick of the enemy fire? How was that managed?
Okay, so first off, we relied on all the pilots to do their jobs. The mission planners would plan a mission based on the threat. We were given a black line through a complex computer system, at least back then it was, now it's probably on your iPhone, but we would fly this black line, and our job was to stay on that black line because if we left it, we might get into a threat area that we didn't want to be. F-117s are low observable, not invisible. They can be seen by early warning radars, so we would do tactics so that if we were seen, we didn't know if we were or if we weren't. We would descend, we would turn, we would climb so that they would lose the contact because we did not want the early warning radars to hand off our location to the target tracking radars that could shoot at us. And they were, target tracking radars for stealth are like looking through a soda straw. They're not going to be able to find us unless they get some time of handoff from an early warning radar. So these missions were all planned, single ship, even simultaneous attack missions. Sometimes we had 8 aircraft go against one target. For example, the nuclear research facility in Baghdad, outside of Baghdad. We had 8 aircraft go after that at one time. We would deconflict by altitude and headings because we wanted to make sure that the aircraft at the higher elevation or altitudes did not drop a bomb through the flight path of another aircraft. So the key was to be on your black line and to be on time. And I'll add something here. So the Iraqis never knew we were there until the first bomb hit. So on a simultaneous attack, you wanted to be exactly on time. And every 117 pilot could hit a TOT within 2 seconds easily, if not right on time. So if you were early and you were doing a simultaneous attack, when your bomb hit, the skies would light up and all the aircraft that were on time behind you had to fly through that AAA to get to the target, which did not make pilots happy. If you were late, the sky was already lit up when you got there, so you didn't want to be late. So you always wanted to be on time, and you heard about it when we landed if you were early. But the bottom line here is mission planning was easy because we all just went and flew by ourselves, and without talking to anybody. General Horner talked about the F-15s wanting to shoot, MiGs. We had to be careful that they didn't shoot us. So we were given certain times block times to fly our missions and certain altitudes, and so that our friendly air knew where we were, not where we were, but what altitudes we were going to be at, and they were not allowed to shoot anybody in that block of altitude, usually about 5,000 feet. So from 15 to 20,000 feet going in and out, they wouldn't engage during a 1-hour period, and that's how we deconflicted.
Okay. Outside of that black line routing that you talked about that you mission planned single ship, how else did you guys mitigate risk? So in other words, how was a bandit pilot to react if he was to see an SA-6 guiding on him while on that black line routing, or he was to see a wall of barrage fire, artillery fire in front of him? Did you guys have procedures? Did you guys experience that?
Yes, we experienced this. Our procedures were stop looking outside. Because the missions were planned with the radar cross-section that we had. And each aircraft had a slightly different radar cross-section. We kind of knew what they were. Each black line I talked about, because we had to go into a threat environment, not always could we not be targeted. So we would call it red time. During that red time, and it might be up to a minute, we knew we could be seen and tracked and targeted. And so we wanted to minimize the red time. If we reacted to anything we saw and came off the black line, we could have made it worse for ourselves. So we did not do that. And if you bank the aircraft, your radar cross-section changes. So if a SAM is launched at you and you bank the aircraft, you're probably highlighting yourself more because the plane is built to fly straight and level and then, avoid threats by turning mostly. So we didn't react. We didn't have any early warning radar or EW systems on board. We didn't know. We didn't get an early notice that something was launched at us. We just saw it outside. So, like I said, if you started to get worried, you just quit looking outside. Now, a lot of times we're in the weather, and because the weather gets bad over there, especially the months we were flying. And the problem with weather and at night is everything looks like it's being shot at you. You can see a fire on the ground and convince yourself it was a SAM or a AAA being shot at you, and it's just sitting there on the ground. And in the weather, as the tracers fly over your canopy, it's just like lightning's going off the whole time. So if I had eye patches, I would have put them on, but we just tried to ignore that and fly our missions and hit our targets.
Okay. So the skies over Baghdad presented your jet its first true taste of enemy fire. How did you mentally prepare yourself to fly in this well-defended slice of airspace, and how confident before that first sortie were you in the stealth technology, the low observer technology?
So pilots, all of us, our mission is to fly, fight, win. We train for years and years and years and hear stories about Vietnam Little minor things happen like just cause, but everybody trains to go to combat, and that's kind of what General Horner said. That was, his best times was in combat. So we trained, and we were ready, and that's all you can do. As far as the stealth technology, the engineers told us it would work. We would get briefings on it. We knew the radar cross-section was low. We knew that we had actually done a red flag type sortie before Desert, because we had come out of the black program, and we knew fighters that rolled up behind us couldn't see us, even though they knew we were there and they couldn't track us. So we were feeling good about those things. So night one, I was feeling pretty good. All the pilots were feeling pretty good. Everybody wanted to be in the first wave or the second wave, and if you weren't, you were upset. After flying the first night, I did not want to fly night number 2. I thought we had 12 in the first wave, 12 in the second wave. All 24 aircraft came back, no damage at all. We're still thinking that we're pretty lucky because all the AAA we saw, it could be a lucky shot. The golden BB that you've heard about would hit us and could take us out. So night 2, I mission planned. Night 3, I flew. So I flew every other day. And after about a week, when nobody was getting hit, we figured out this stuff works pretty good, and we trusted it. I mean, again, the engineers were correct. So I thank them all the time when I see them.
Amazing. Can you share a little bit about the mission planning that led up to that first night's sortie?
So again, most of that was practicing taking off, calm out, rejoining on tanker, calm out, and no lights, no beacons. And realize we didn't have a radar. So everything was based on meeting at a certain point on time. Now we did have air-to-air TACANs, so in good guy land, we could turn those on and see the distance we were from the tankers and realize that we're getting closer and this should work out. During those missions, we liked it when the moon was out. In combat, we did not, but the moon made it brighter and you could see the tanker. So we practiced all these kinds of procedures. Desert Shield lasted for several months, so obviously we had to train more pilots as they came over after getting checked out at Tonopah. And we practiced all those things. And then, like I said, we practiced the missions up along the border. Mm-hmm. And then we practiced hitting simulated targets that were going to be like the targets we would experience in Iraq. A lot of sand over there, not many trees, not much humidity. So we just practiced so that when we went into combat, it'd be easier for us.
So all this training, all this mission prep in Desert Shield, how did that prepare you to understand the overall air strategy of Desert Storm and where the F-117 was going to fit into this strategy?
So working for General Horner was General Glosson, who was at the Black Hole up in Riyadh, and General Deptula, which most of you, if not all of you, should know. Mm-hmm. He might be called an air power zealot. He's a great guy. He was lieutenant colonel, so he had the ATO. His task was to put the ATO together. We called him the keeper of the Holy Plan because that was the first 3 nights of the war. And we, myself and a few others, were part of the mission planning cell during Desert Shield. We would go up to the Black Hole and talk to them, the planners, for the overall strategy for the air campaign, and they would give us our targets so that we had the first 3 nights planned before Desert Storm started. We knew what our targets were going to be. Okay. We also knew how we fit in, and again, primarily our first couple nights were to take out radar sites and communication sites. The AT&T building in Baghdad, that's the one that was on the cover of Newsweek magazine, so that they could not communicate, and their air threat would be 0.
Okay. I've got to ask this question. So you learned after that first sortie that your wife, who was also deployed with you to Saudi Arabia, was witness to a very interesting and sobering meeting. It's a meeting that really discussed the odds of your all's survival and coming back as far as the JIT. Can you describe this meeting from your perspective?
Well, she can describe it, but she told me about it. So when we took off, the wing commander called in all the senior leaders, and my wife Bridget was the acting LG there. So, and he said that the president and Secretary of Defense Cheney would not be surprised if we lost half of our aircraft. And so he told them all to prepare for that.
Wow.
It didn't happen. We're all back, and it was great every night to land and have her there,
Yeah.
so we could have a dinner together
Awesome.
or breakfast.
So you've kind of already hinted at it, but Desert Storm was not the 117's world debut combat event. The U.S. invasion earlier would instead introduce the stink bug to the world. You were lucky enough to lead this strike package from Tonopah, Nevada. Can you describe this unique story, as well as share any of the valuable lessons that you gained from this to carry forward to the opening night of Desert Storm?
This is a very long story.
That's a good one.
But I'll shorten up pieces of it. We did fly out of Tonopah. It was the longest combat sortie I've ever flown. The problem with it was a couple things. Once we got down to the Florida coast, the weather got really bad. Actually, so the 117, both during Just Cause and Desert Storm, did not have GPS. So we had to be able to see things on the ground to update our INSs because they would drift, as all INSs did back then. And the last update I got on Just Cause was over Tinker Air Force Base on their TACAN. So I had to fly all the way to Panama without an update and trust the system. Once we got to Florida, we were on a KC-10, and only certain tankers were allowed to refuel us because of the training they needed to refuel the 117. And we had come out of the black world recently, and only a certain couple squadrons, one 135 squadron and one KC-10 squadron, were briefed on our program. This KC-10, the weather was so bad, he took us down below 3,000 feet. We did not have radar altimeters, so we had to trust the tanker that we weren't going to hit anything. And we had to refuel down there below 3,000 feet in nasty weather, which was pretty eye-opening because you're getting bounced around pretty bad. Once we got to the east side of Panama, there were 8 of us. We had 8 different targets. The plan here was to not kill Noriega. It was to capture him. So we had targets. The Panamanian Defense Force barracks were 2 of the targets. He had a beach house, which was a target, and he had a mountain house called Mountain House. And those were the 4 targets, 2 aircraft on each one. However, if they didn't know where Noriega was, we were not allowed to hit his houses. So what happened was they didn't know where he was, so the only targets were the barracks. And at the end of the mission, right before the mission started, special forces were in charge of this whole thing. Realized that nobody had flown or done any combat, Army, Navy, anybody. We did not stealth up the aircraft. The reason we were chosen was because we had that GBU-27. We had shown that special forces had come up to Nellis, gave me a target, gave me a TOT. They went to the range and sat on the ground and watched me hit that target, me and another guy, at an exact TOT. So they said, you guys are going because we can't afford collateral damage. And you have to be on time because 30 seconds after your bombs hit, the SEALs are jumping out of airplanes. And the Delta forces, all the special ops people. So we had to be on time. They decided endgame not to have us hit the barracks. They wanted us to hit the fields in front of the barracks to stun and disorient the Panamanian Defense Forces. Turns out they had a heads up anyway. Nobody was in the barracks. So we did what they said. Their plan was then to get them to give up and say, if you don't give up, we're going to start taking out, where you're living and where you're working. Whether that happened or not, I don't know. We hit the fields, we left. Nobody was supposed to know we were there. Somebody leaked it. Somebody then said, well, why'd you use 117s? You didn't need them there. And then somebody said they didn't even hit anything. They hit fields, even though that was our target. So There's more to the story. I don't want to harp on just cause, because this is a Desert Storm event. But there's more to it, and it was very interesting. Thankfully, Desert Storm proved the value of stealth, and that we put bombs where we aimed, and they went there.
Is there anything you learned during that experience, though, that you took forward to Desert Storm?
Yes, if you can be in charge, be in charge. And hopefully it'll be airmen, because airmen understand airmen. Okay. And that's kind of, again, what General Horner said.
Awesome. All right, so we'll fast forward 13 years after Desert Storm. You'd return to Southwest Asia and command the Air Force's largest air expeditionary wing. How would you describe the implications of Desert Storm, implications of air power in Desert Storm over a decade later?
So I did get some lessons learned out of Desert Storm. First off, how to fight with a coalition. Mm-hmm. So we had coalition forces at Al-Udeid, and so every time we flew, we coordinated what we were going to do. Now, realize during OIF, Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, we weren't dropping weapons every sortie. We had air dominance over Iraq and Afghanistan, which meant that every bomb we dropped over there was analyzed by senior leaders. So we were getting back to Vietnam. We're getting back to ROE being set up by political people versus warfighters. And so whenever we dropped a weapon, they wanted to see the videotape. If there was any collateral damage, be it because Intel had the target wrong, or be it because the bomb didn't go exactly where it was supposed to, we were being scrutinized, the Air Force. And that's because they could. There was air dominance. A soldier has not had a bomb drop on him from the air since Korea in 1953. You should have learned that this year. Air superiority and air dominance is what we do in the Air Force, besides dropping weapons. So because of that, because they had all this time to analyze things, the Air Force was being scrutinized. It started with Allied Force. If you remember, I can't believe we gave this video to them out, but on TV you saw a pilot getting ready to, or he actually had dropped a weapon on a bridge, and as it was timing out, because the time of flight was more than 30 seconds, a train came across the bridge, and a train was hit. Well, that pilot didn't know that train was coming. He couldn't see that in his HUD or his display, and I just don't think we should have put that out, because it looks bad to the Air Force. Yet it was part of a mistake of war. I mean, it just happened. So I think under this new administration, the ROE has loosened up again over there, because you have to delegate and let the mission commanders and the pilots do their job. And if you hand tie them, it's not going to work. The only time we were allowed to drop quickly was during we called it a tick, troops in contact. If a quick reaction force in Iraq was being threatened or being shot at, they obviously wanted us to come in and help and take out the threat. So then we had a quicker response. But normally it could take up to 30 minutes to get permission to drop a bomb. That, as we pivot to the Pacific, that can't happen. You have to rely on the pilots to do their job, and the WISOs and whoever else.
Okay. So I'll transition to your leadership experiences before we hand it over to the audience. So leadership development was an important emphasis this year for Gathering of Eagle students. So for this transition, highlight, you'd go on to command at many levels. You would eventually command the 9th Fighter Squadron, so you go back to 117, and then you would just continue to progress up there until your retirement. We've got a lot of students in the audience that are going to be taking command of a squadron in the very near future. What advice can you share with them about how they might be able to overcome the challenges that they're likely to face while they're in command?
So, you heard a little bit of this earlier, but be yourselves. You've all gotten where you are because of your personalities and the way you do leadership. And so don't change because you think you need to change. Just continue to do your job. Command is important to everyone. It's what we all strive for, and it doesn't matter what you're commanding. But once you get there, you have to rely on your people. And I always say one of the keys is trust. General Horner talked about delegation. You can't do it all. You'll fail because you'll be working 24-hour days, and you can't do that. So trust your people. Realize that everybody in the military, no matter what service, wants to do a good job. Nobody says, I'm going to do something stupid today. But mistakes are made. And if mistakes are made, you retrain them and you keep them. Or you change their job if you have to. Crimes are a different story. Those you have to take care of. That will be your toughest job as a commander. The hardest thing I ever had to do was fire a squadron commander at Al-Udeid. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially over there, because somebody had to come in and replace him. And so trust your people, delegate, and make sure you have good people working for you that can sit in when you're not available.
Okay. Well, at this time, I'll hand the floor over to the audience if there's any questions. The floor is yours.
This is what General Horner went through. I think they got to put that video, that slide up that shows you how to go up to the mic and push the button. You know, when I was at ACSC, we didn't have that slide, so obviously we didn't know how to do it. And use your command voice.
Good morning, General.
Good morning.
Major Batterton, Flight 33. After the first night and throughout your remaining sorties in support of Desert Storm, did you see the mission of the F-117 evolve?
Well, our primary mission stayed the same. Our targets changed. Our techniques, tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, as you've heard them called, changed because we learned a lot of things. A lot of aircraft that were getting damaged over there, not F-117s, were getting damaged and hit over Baghdad. So after the first week or two, General Horner decreed nobody else is going to Baghdad at night anymore, except the 117s, which made us feel good, except again, like I said, we had to be below 10,000 feet over Baghdad, and that wasn't comfortable. But we did learn things. I talked about the software on the aircraft. I talked about the GBU-27 bunker buster. We carried two, but at the time, the weapons bay doors had to open past the 90-degree point. So it had to go 135 degrees. So you can only drop one bomb, one GBU-27 at a time. So if we wanted to drop two on the same designated mean point of impact, a DIMPI, we have to reattack. And sometimes we had to drop two to get it to penetrate entirely and get into that bunker. So a reattack, we learned that the AAA would start, and 8 minutes later it would stop. And we didn't know why. It could have been they ran out of ammo. It could have been because they got tired. It could have been because their gun barrels got hot. We didn't care. We just knew it did. So when we reattacked, we would make sure and go out for more than 8 minutes, because then the AAA had stopped, and we could come back in and it wouldn't start again until the bomb hit. So, and then one other thing. Originally, if our targets, we did not have a all-weather capability. So if the target was obscured by weather, we could not drop, because we never could drop without identifying the target, and that was the collateral damage issue. So if the weather was bad, they would say, find a bridge and take it out. Okay, that's easy. There were a lot of bridges in the Baghdad area. And so we could always find a bridge. Well, after about a week, General Deptula, or Lieutenant Colonel Deptula, called and said, stop taking out all the bridges, because after this is over, we're not going to be able to get anywhere, because you guys are taking out all the bridges. So our alternate targets became something else. So target set changed as the missions went along, but tactics, not much.
Jonas Roman, civilian. How do you think the use of the stealth bomber, such as the Nighthawk, was such a necessary component in the success in the Gulf War, and is stealth pivotal to the future wars?
Yes. Stealth fighter, to me, is more important than the stealth bomber, but I'm just kidding. So I think low observable technology is going to be around forever. My opinion, but it's also shared by a lot of others. F-117 with 1970s technology, B-2 was 1980s, F-22 1990s, and now we have the F-35, and they're all stealthy, okay? But more plays into that than just radar cross-section. There's other ways to defeat the threat. But I think the new bomber will have stealth characteristics. I'm not briefed into it. I'm not sure, but I would guess it would. I would guess that if the Navy could make the F-18 a low observable platform, they would, but they can't. So I think stealth is here to stay. As far as Desert Storm, the 117s flew 2% of the sorties and took out over 50% of the strategic targets. So obviously, we did what we were built for, and I think the American people got their money's worth with that platform.
Sir, Major Murado, thank you for sharing your story with us this morning. My question for you is based on those lessons learned that you shared with us during one of the earlier questions. Is there any different uses for the 117 you would have seen being used during Desert Storm?
No, because of the technology we had at the time. After Desert Storm, Secretary of the Air Force Donald Rice had 4 of us go to Nellis and talk to him and a few others about what we thought we would need for future combat. And there were several things. We wanted GPS, which they got later. We wanted an all-weather bomb, which turned into JDAM, and that's what started the whole JDAM program. We wanted to be able to talk on the radios while we were stealthed up. So we needed an LO conformal antenna so that we weren't, blind after we went into a combat environment. And we got that. So some of those things I had when I was at Holloman, some came on later. So technology did change. They improved the software so that the airplanes that flew in Allied force were able to drop that GBU-27 above 20,000 feet. They'll tell you it was still just as bad, and I'm sure it was, but being at 25,000 feet is a lot better than being at 8,000 feet when it comes to AAA. So they improved a lot of things, and that was helpful to the future engagements that the 117 had. But again, that was 70s technology. The infrared system, the target tracking systems were getting old. They didn't make the parts anymore, and it was cost prohibitive to rebuild those, and that's why they retired the F-117.
Sir, Major Beckenhauer, you talked about Operation Just Cause. What changes would you like to have seen if an airman had been in charge?
I don't want to badmouth too many things. Realize Just Cause was the first joint military operation in combat in a long, long time. So everybody wanted to participate. Everybody wanted to be first, and everybody wanted to do the best and get their service highlighted in front of Congress and the American people. So I'm convinced that I told you right before I took off on that mission, I was told that the 3-star in charge, who was not an airman, decided he did not want us to hit those barracks because they wanted to use those barracks later on. For what? But I didn't care because I just wanted to go fly combat mission, as we all did. And so I think that was a political decision to highlight maybe the Air Force, but to show that we did a bad job. Because the story was never told by those in charge that we weren't supposed to hit the barracks, that we were supposed to hit the fields. Only the Air Force told that story. And we weren't allowed to tell it for a long time because the whole just cause was classified. And the only ones that could release it were not the Air Force. So there's still parts of that I can't talk about because it's never been released. But I think it was all politically motivated, but again, we just wanted to go do what we were training for, and so we did.
Hey, good morning, sir. Lieutenant Commander Matthews. Speaking about being highlighted as a service and then specifically as the F-117s, I noticed in the expertly crafted chapter in the GOE book.
Did you write it?
No, but somebody did.
Oh.
So, sir, I noticed there's a photo in there of you with the President George Bush. How did that affect the 117 community, and then kind of your hero status as a platform coming out of Desert Storm? What kind of effect did that have on the community after the war?
A major impact for the Air Force, because the F-117 was a success story. So post Desert Storm, it was not like post Vietnam. There were ceremonies in DC and throughout the country. There was a big parade on the mall in Washington, DC. Everybody was well accepted by the American public. Vietnam vets were there thanking us, like they owed us a thanks, we owed them the thanks. So it was a success story. I mean, the air campaign was a success. They also had this thing called Stealth Week at Andrews Air Force Base. And I brought the 117 in there. There was a B-2 in there. There was the version that had been decided on for the F-22. There was a stealth cruise missile. And it was a whole week. All the staff from Congress came, a lot of senators, a lot of congressmen, and the president came that one day. So he came and he wanted to sit up there. His one question to me was, because he had ejected out of an aircraft, he said, when you eject, does this canopy leave first? That was the only question. And that picture was taken, but it was also on CNN, and it shows him going like this. And everybody goes, what was he asking you? But the bottom line is, the goal there for the Air Force was to sell the B-2 to Congress, which worked, even though it was only 21 of them, and the F-22. So they were using the F-117 success for the B-2 and the F-22, and it worked.
Morning, sir. Major Ken Hills, Flight 35. Asking you to think back to when you were the wing commander at Al Udeid, and now we're almost a decade past that time, and Al Udeid has become more of a enduring base or a pseudo-enduring base with deployees, command sponsorship, families, etc., where it's become almost routine to deploy there, and it's just normal. It's what we do, which is kind of different than Desert Storm, where we went there, we accomplished the mission, and we pretty much came home, with the exception, of course, Northern Watch and Southern Watch. Do you believe that this enduring entrenchment in the Middle East is causing us to not achieve a decisive victory, and it's just normal to continuously deploy there for the next decade or a couple of decades?
I wouldn't call it entrenchment, I would call it a presence. I think it's no different than our presence in Korea or in Europe, NATO. I think it's required because we have to have something over there. Al Udeid is the right base to keep in my mind because it has the kayak, so all the planning can be done there. It does have the housing now. It's built up. It's got a gym better than any I've ever seen in the Air Force. You can have 2 drinks of alcohol a week. At least that's what it used to be. I don't know, what is it now? But they have a pool. I'm not sure I'd want to go over there with my family, but it is an option. But I think we need to keep that presence over there just because we need to be there. We need to be able to talk to them like General Horner said. And it's, if you don't know them, you can't. It's very difficult. So I engage with the Qatari commander all the time. Sometimes it was easy, sometimes it was difficult. Sometimes they'd forget what they promised, but not being there would not be the answer. So I'll leave it up to our leadership now on how many bases we need over there, but we need some type of presence in my mind.
So I got a follow-up for you before we hand it over to your closing remarks.
Okay?
So your thoughts on air power. You mentioned during your time at ACSC in 1992, a paper that you had authored on the use of air power during Desert Storm. You got some mixed reviews.
Yeah.
I'm
So
curious to hear about that.
So I wrote a paper that air power could have won Desert Storm by itself. It just would have taken a little longer. I firmly believe that. There are other services that don't. The Navy at Naval War College at the time, post-Desert Storm, was briefing that there was not an air campaign. I won't comment anymore on that. The Army, to them, it was a 100-hour war. And if you go through the halls of the Pentagon down Army Corridor, that's what it says. So, okay. But to me, yes, we would have had to have troops on the ground for them to surrender to. I mean, Iraqis have surrendered to predators. I said, looking up at a predator. But you know, you need somebody to take care of all that. I'm not saying the 100-hour war wasn't required. I think it was. It did a good job. But I think air power proved what it could do and is still proving what it could do. And I think all the services now understand that. I don't think we get the credit. We, the Air Force, gets the credit it deserves with the American people, the news media, or Congress, because we're humble, like me. And you know, I don't normally talk about what I'm talking about right here, but you brought me here to talk about it, so I am. But you know, we don't do a good job telling what we do. You know, oh, we've been at war in Iraq for 10 years. 10 years? The Air Force has been over there since 1990. So, you know, but sometimes they forget that. And you know, I'm not sure what you all studied this year, but you know, this in lieu of training we were doing, where we were supporting the other services because we were looking for something to do, I guess. I don't know. I think that was all bad because we got away from what we do as airmen, and I think we need to get back to that. And I think General Goldfein is taking us all back to that. You know, the squadron initiatives he's looking at. For those of you that are going to take over squadrons, you know, you start it all. It's up to you to help fix it, because your people are going to be looking up to you. And so help him help the Air Force.
Yes, sir. The floor is yours for any closing remarks.
Okay, so I'll just close up. In 1992, 25 years ago, I was sitting out there and never thought I would do what I did. The first gentleman that introduced us this morning called us legends. I think there are 7 legends here. I'm a legend in my own mind, as my wife tells me. But you're the future. You will be legends. And I think in the next couple minutes, you will have one of your classmates up here that is also going to be a legend. And with that, I'll close. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.